Hello world, this is Remakes and Remasters, or R&R for short, and I have some ramblings regarding the recent remake of Gabriel Knight, Sins of the Fathers. 20 years after its release, we now have improved sound, 3D graphics, and a couple billion more colours to choose from. Along with these, we get various interface improvements and a dash of new content, enough to bring it up to date and add a little value to something that came out back when people were still using Windows 3.1. There's always a risk with remakes and remasters. It might not capture the feel of the original, they might change some classic elements that are held dear by fans, it might require OpenGL 3.3 support for absolutely no good goddamn reason, Grim Fandango why. So I was glad to hear that the original writer, director and designer Jane Jensen was at the helm. To me, that indicated that we weren't getting a soulless cash-in. And yet, I'm not sure about this one. Don't get me wrong, it's definitely not a soulless cash-in, but that doesn't mean it's good or indeed better than the original. So in no particular order, here's what's different. Firstly, it bucks the recent trend of letting you switch between original and shiny. I doubt letting you go back to the old look would have been impossible to do, but how that feature usually works is by emulating the original game and putting fancy new stuff on top. The special editions of Monkey Island 1 and 2 run this way, for example. Given that the original Gabriel Knight was in 2D and this new version is in 3D, I can see that being pretty difficult to reconcile. So we're firmly in remake territory here, nothing but the story remains from the original. Bear in mind this is a totally different company making the 20th anniversary edition, so chances are they wouldn't have the rights to those assets even if they were available. But one thing at a time. How does that 3D work out? Well, I don't know about anyone else, but everything feels a little slower to me. This could be because there's a difference in frame rate between the two, but I think that's only part of it. With a frame rate as low as around 15 FPS for the original, there were certain states of transition you didn't bother showing. For example, if you want to walk in the opposite direction from where you're facing. In both editions, Gabriel will turn before walking, but there's more frames of turning in the new one. I suppose there was no mandate from the world at large to make this feel exactly like the original, not without that speed slider letting us Benny Hill all over the place, but the new version feels like more of a slog. In fact, I'm pretty sure it makes that goddamn puzzle with the mime harder. I don't need to see that many frames of Gabriel turning, I'd rather get on with playing the game. It's actually a common mistake with amateur 3D animators. The animation is made slow enough to show all their work rather than how long the action would realistically take. And yet they surprised me in other areas, such as the animations of Gabriel and Grace putting on their coats. That's a surprisingly difficult thing to do. Generally those are two separate models with two separate animations. Getting those to match up is like trying to choreograph a dance routine when the performers will only practice in separate countries and you're putting the footage together later. Although in this case it's made easier by the fact you only ever see it from one angle. A big part of the 3D makeover are these talking heads in the conversations, now with hot lip sync action. They're competent, not broken, not outstanding either, as good as any other game that isn't LA Noire. Unless you try and skip lines, because it's very easy to make the characters talk over one another.
Okay,
Mr.
you're right.
Knight, you've
I really just
lied
wanted
about
to see
your
you
identity
again.
and
Strangely enough, skipping one line can cause the next one to end prematurely. That's beyond weird.
Kind of practice is actually called Voodoo. The religion has a strong following in New Orleans. In fact, it is growing. There are several.
And I'm behind with things, this has been out for a while. I figure if they were ever going to patch it, it would have been done by now. While we're on the conversations, the entire voice cast has been replaced and it's hit or miss. Assuming that they could have even got the original cast back, 20 years is a long time. They're going to sound different now. So how did the new cast work out? Gabriel's voice sounds a lot more dim-witted than His Holiness Tim Curry, but it's no less hilarious to hear him try and pronounce German in a southern accent. Yeah, like I could do any better. I would comment on his attempt at an Irish accent too, but I think it would anger my ancestors. He ends up with this weird quality that almost sounds like the pitch has been lowered in post. I'll need to comment on the narrator as well, since after Gabriel, it's the voice you'll likely hear most often. I didn't find her as irritating as the old one. As much as I feel rotten for saying that since the voice actress from the original passed away, I'm judging the work here, how she sounds and the effect that has on the game. And like last time, you can turn her voice off if you want. By contrast, the updated music works very well. Some mildly cheesy synth strings here and there, but they absolutely fit with the original pieces. Which does mean the police station music is accurately represented, and I was never really a fan. Of all the parts that have been changed in this, the music is closest to the original and probably my favourite part of all. Now, I'm never sure about 2D to 3D upgrades. If you're looking to capture the feel of the original, this is probably the hardest way to do it. Some things they replicate pretty well, like the title cards at the start of each day, although this time they look a bit cleaner for some reason. Sometimes they try doing things differently, like having all the cutscenes in this digital comic style that makes Gabriel look way more Bishonen than his 3D counterpart. Aside from the occasional Adobe Flash level of animation, I like the distinct look they have. Then again, you'll sometimes zoom in on an object or area like this, and still be able to interact with objects in this scene behind it. That can't be intentional, surely. But thankfully, the jingle that plays when you score points remains intact. If that wasn't there, I couldn't have possibly recommended this version. And so on to the interface, where I normally lay about 90% of my criticism. They replaced the traditional Sierra interface of pick verb or right click to cycle through verbs with a medallion interface, or coin interface if you prefer. The earliest examples of this had you click and hold, which takes an extra half second of my life I'd like back, please. Instead, Gabriel Knight has you click once, get shown only the relevant verbs, and then you click the one you want, which frees up the right mouse button to do nothing. They do use the spacebar though, pressing that shows all the usable objects in the scene along with their names, which is more useful than merely highlighting them with a little blobby thing, but it can cause its own problems. Another change is that double clicking a spot in the scene teleports Gabriel there with a weird fading effect. Not as funny as it was in Torrent's Passage, but potentially helpful. Especially now that areas that were previously multiple screens now scroll when Gabriel reaches the edge. That's definitely one change I like. They also continue this weird trend that Sierra Adventure games had. You would pick an item from your inventory and it would join the list of verbs that you could cycle through. So for the remake, it shows up in the medallion. On the one hand, it makes some sort of sense, as if you're putting an object in your hand, but I'd much rather be able to pull objects straight from the inventory rather than set up an item slot. That feels awkward. Outside of the usual malarkey, you've got the journal replacing the tape recorder from before. Technically it's better since it condenses the important information rather than makes you search for it. That'll depend on you though. I imagine some people will prefer to do the legwork themselves. Frankly, I'm okay with the journal. I mean, I was thankful to have something to tell me what I was meant to do because I did forget once or twice. Such absent-mindedness also meant that I had to use the new hint system, which ranges from giving helpful nudges to outright telling you, but only at your prompting. In any case, it's completely optional to use, and you can turn it off entirely if you want, along with the tutorial messages, the narrator voice, and the subtitles. I still miss that speed option. I would talk about the rest of the settings at this point, but it's a Unity game. You get resolution, 6 presets, and an anti-aliasing option once you're in game. That's it. It might be indicative of how much has changed in these 20 years. Back in the day, you had Sierra, a big name publisher funding this game. Now we have a small independent studio. Not only has the amount of backing changed, but the cost of development as well. The original feels like something professional put out by a professional studio using a tried and tested engine. The Anniversary Edition very much feels like an independent effort, with some of the quality shortcuts and glitches on display. As legendary a pedigree as some of the staff might have, you can't substitute that level of funding and infrastructure. So overall, I don't rate this remake higher than the original. The new art style is more colourful, but comes with its own technical problems and awkward changes that mar the experience for me. I don't usually rate graphics above things like gameplay or interface. Although, to be fair, interface is one of the few places where the 20th Anniversary Edition has the advantage. That and you don't need to set up DOSBox to play. The remake can be run natively. Then again, if you buy the original from a site like GOG, that's already taken care of. Click icon, play game. There's nothing in the remake that took away the feeling I should be playing the original instead. So that's my recommendation, buy the original. It was better the first time.